December 1943, Camp Shelby, Mississippi. The air is thick with humidity and something else, a simmering desperate need to prove something, to a nation that has labelled them enemy aliens, to families imprisoned behind barbed wire in desolate camps, to themselves. They are the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, Nisei, second-generation Japanese-American sons, and they are about to become the most lethal, most decorated unit for its size and length of service in the entire history of the United States military. But here's the thing you probably didn't know. Their greatest battle wouldn't be against the Germans. It would be against the crushing weight of their own country's prejudice. The story doesn't start on a European battlefield. It starts with the signature. Executive Order 9066, February 19th, 1942, 10 weeks after Pearl Harbor. A stroke of a pen that authorized the forced removal and incarceration of over 120,000 persons of Japanese ancestry from the West Coast. 2/3 of them were American citizens. Their crime, their blood. Families were given days to dispose of their lives, homes, farms, businesses, selling everything for pennies on the dollar. They were herded into temporary assembly centers, racetracks where families lived in horse stalls, the air still thick with the smell of manure. Then they were shipped to 10 remote relocation camps: Manzanar, Heart Mountain, Tool Lake, tar paper barracks in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by watchtowers and armed guards pointing their guns inward. The irony was a bitter pill. While their parents and siblings languished behind barbed wire, the US government initially classified their sons as 4C, enemy aliens, unfit for service. They were deemed untrustworthy, a threat, but then a twisted opportunity. The War Department, facing manpower needs and complex political pressures, saw a chance for a propaganda coup. They would form a segregated all-Japanese American unit. The very men whose loyalty was questioned so deeply they and their families were imprisoned were now being asked to fight for the country that had imprisoned them. The recruitment poster was a masterpiece of cognitive dissonance. A helmeted soldier under the bold text, "Fighting Americans." The question hung in the air, unspoken but deafening. How American are you? The response defied all logic. Thousands of young men from the camps volunteered. They signed up from behind barbed wire. Their motivations were a tangled knot of duty, defiance, and a fierce, unshakable belief in the promise of the Constitution. Go for broke, they would say, a Hawaiian pidgin phrase from the gambler's table. Risk everything for the big win. The ultimate bet was their lives, wagered on the hope that their sacrifice would redeem their family's honor and secure their place as Americans. They arrived at Camp Shelby, these boys from Hawaii and the mainland camps. A cultural chasm separated them. The Buddha heads from the islands were boisterous, confident. The Kotonks from the mainland were more reserved, hardened by the fresh sting of incarceration. Fights broke out, tensions flared, but they were forged together in the crucible of training. They discovered a shared burden, a shared purpose. They weren't just soldiers, they were representatives. Every drill, every march, every rifle qualification was performed under an invisible, immense pressure. Failure was not an option. They had to be better, tougher, faster. They had to be perfect. The 442nd landed in Italy in June 1944, attaching to the famed 34th Red Bull Division. They were immediately thrown into the meat grinder of the drive north towards Rome. This was not a clean war. This was the brutal, bloody fight for the Gothic line through the ancient, rugged hills of Tuscany. You trudge through mud that sucks at your boots. The air smells of damp earth and cordite. The rain is cold, relentless. You're climbing a hill that seems to have no top, your muscles screaming, your breath ragged, and at any moment a hidden machine gun nest, a mortar round, a sniper's bullet. This was their new reality, and they excelled. They fought with a ferocity that stunned their veteran comrades. At Belvedere, they executed a flawless double envelopment, surrounding and annihilating an elite German battalion in a single day. They were relentless. They used the terrain, moved with a speed and silence that unnerved the enemy. They weren't just good soldiers, they were artists of warfare, but their reputation for taking impossible assignments was about to be cemented in the forests of eastern France. October 1944, the Vosges Mountains, dense, dark woods, cold, wet, miserable. The 1st Battalion of the 141st Infantry Regiment, a Texas National Guard unit nicknamed the Lost Battalion, had been surrounded by superior German forces. They were trapped, low on ammunition, food, and medical supplies. Their casualties mounted. Every attempt to relieve them had been bloodily repulsed. The command came down. The 442nd was ordered to break through. What followed was 5 days of some of the most brutal close-quarters fighting of the European theatre. It was a nightmare landscape. Hill after hill, ridge after ridge. The Germans had the high ground. They were dug in, with interlocking fields of fire from machine guns, mortars, and artillery zeroed in on every approach. The Nisei soldiers attacked. Again, and again, and again. They charged up steep, wooded slopes into a hail of steel. They fought tree by tree, foxhole by foxhole. The forest was so thick visibility was often only a few feet. The crack of rifle fire was constant, the thump of explosions shaking the very ground. The mud was stained red. The casualty reports were horrifying. Companies were reduced to platoons, platoons to squads. Medics worked tirelessly, dragging the wounded through the murderous fire. There was no sleep, no hot food, just the relentless, grinding pressure to push forward, to save the Texans. They were exhausted, drenched and bleeding, but they did not stop. A squad led by Sergeant Barney Hajiro, a man previously relegated to kitchen duty for insubordination, single-handedly silenced 2 machine gun nests, allowing his company to advance. Privates like James Akubo, a medic, crawled through enemy fire to treat and evacuate dozens of wounded men from both the 422nd and the 141st. His heroism was so profound, it would later earn him the Medal of Honor. Finally, on the 5th day, after a desperate final bayonet charge into the German lines, a link-up was made. A lost patrol from the 422nd, led by Staff Sergeant Shiro Kashino, broke through the last German perimeter and made contact with the besieged Texans. The relief was not triumphant. It was somber. The rescuers were as battered as the rescued. The 442nd had suffered over 800 casualties to save 211 Texans. The math was brutal. Some of the Nisei, in the exhaustion and grief of the moment, muttered the unthinkable. They used us for cannon fodder. The irony was a gut punch. They had just proven their loyalty with a river of their own blood for a country that still held their families captive. The war ground on. The 442nd, now filled with replacements for the men lost in the Vosges, pushed into the south of France, a rapid advance through the Rhône Valley and into the rugged Alps. Here they faced a different kind of fight, a war of position and endurance in the frozen, high-altitude forts along the French-Italian border. They assaulted German positions that were considered impregnable. The fight for the high ground near Bruyères, the bloody capture of Hill 140, and finally, the assault on the Gothic line itself, breaching the German defences in a surprise attack through a supposedly impassable mountain pass. Their final act in the European theatre was perhaps their most symbolically potent. In April 1945, they were pulled from the front lines in Italy and ordered on a final, desperate mission, the rescue of the Lost Battalion of the Texas 36th Division in the Po Valley. They smashed through the German lines in a ferocious day-long assault, breaking the back of the German resistance in Italy. It was a devastating, perfect coda to their combat record. When the guns finally fell silent, the numbers were almost incomprehensible. The 442nd Regimental Combat Team, with its associated 100th Infantry Battalion, was awarded 7 Presidential Unit citations, the equivalent of a Distinguished Service Cross for the entire unit, 21 Medals of Honor, most awarded belatedly after a review in the 1990s revealed racial bias in the initial awarding process, 52 Distinguished Service Crosses, 560 Silver Stars, plus 28 Oak Leaf Clusters, 4,000 Bronze Stars, plus 1,200 Oak Leaf Clusters, 9,580 Purple Hearts. They paid for their honour in blood. The unit had a casualty rate of 314%. For every man who started, more than 3 were wounded or killed. They were, by the numbers, the most decorated unit in US military history. The war ended. The Nisei soldiers came home. Some returned to families still emerging from the camps to find their pre-war lives and possessions gone. They faced continued racism. No Japs allowed signs in the very communities they had fought to liberate, but they carried themselves with a quiet, unassailable dignity. They had gone for broke, and in a way, they had won. Their service became a silent, powerful argument. In 1946, President Truman welcomed them home at the White House. "You fought not only the enemy," he told them, "but you fought prejudice, and you have won." Their heroism was cited in legal and political battles, helping to lay the groundwork for the civil rights movement. It contributed to the passage of the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952, which allowed Japanese immigrants to become naturalized citizens. It helped force a nation to look at its own contradictions. The story of the 442nd is not a simple tale of triumph. It is a story of profound moral complexity. It is about men who fought for a country that failed them, who used the very instruments of their oppression as the tools for their liberation. They did not ask for the burden of proof, but they shouldered it without flinching. They bet their lives. They went for broke. And in doing so, they did more than win battles. They helped redefine the meaning of American courage, American loyalty, and the very idea of who belongs under the banner of we the people. Their legacy is not just in the medals they won, but in the country they helped to force to become better.